When you put your heart and soul into creating something, you don't want it to be good. You want it to be great. What does it take to get there? I'm Questlove, and this is Quest for Craft, my collaboration with the Belvini, a deep dive into the obsessive, never-ending, whatever-it-takes journey to create something extraordinary. To master a craft, you have to practice for years. In fact, thanks to my guest, Malcolm Gladwell, there's become accepted wisdom that it takes around 10,000 hours. But if practice was all it took, there'd be a lot more superstars in the NBA. So I sat down with Malcolm at Electric Lady Studios to investigate what lies beyond practice on the road to greatness.
How often do you get asked about 10,000 hours a day?
Too many times, I think is the right answer.
Do you regret that theory?
Sort of. I mean, it's one of those things that you have no control over how people will interpret and use it. And it was a useful exercise in humility.
Right.
And I was simply trying to make the point that talent requires time to be expressed. You know, I had a whole thing about the Beatles, and you understand how much time the Beatles spent playing in like Hamburg before they became famous. But it also happens to be the case that Paul McCartney and John Lennon are geniuses, and George Harrison.
Right.
Maybe even Ringo.
I was going to say.
Maybe even Ringo.
Well, that was also Pete Best period, so you know.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
What I want to know is, can you actually be too good at something? Like, what happens when exploring the unknown is no longer part of your process?
Well, that's the end, right? That's the beginning of the end of your life as a creative person. Sometimes we fall into the trap of thinking what the audience wants is mastery.
Right.
They want to see something done perfectly. But actually, they don't want to see something done perfectly. What we want is something exciting, something that challenges us and engages us.
So struggle is more exciting to you than... Look, I mean, I can imagine watching Steph Curry. You know, he can phone in a three-point shot from half court like it's nothing, and it gets frustrating because it's like, okay, great, you're good. We get it.
I'm more interested when Steph tries something like audacious. Right. I don't care if it fails. In fact, when it does fail, I just applaud him all the more for trying it. I mean, there was a thing, I'm a big runner, and there was a moment in the Olympics in the women's steeplechase when a woman named Courtney Farrick, American, she's running up against people who all are, on paper, better than she is.
Right.
And halfway through the race, she just says, F it. And she breaks away. And she's like, I'm gonna run this race on my terms. If I fail, I fail. Mm-hmm. She does it. She ends up winning the silver medal. She didn't win. She didn't set a world record. She just did something that was so badass. Mm-hmm. It was like riveting. I'll remember that for the rest of my life.
Right.
I will not remember the workmanlike perfection of LeBron getting 30 points and 12 rebounds in some regular season game.
Okay.
That's gonna fade away.
But can you practice creating that sense of wonder? Is audaciousness a skill to be mastered? For years, Dan White has been blowing my mind during his regular visits to The Tonight Show. I wanted to hear more about his thoughts on practice and how it relates to the craft of magic.
I think the role of a magician is to remind people that mysteries and illusions and amazing things still exist. I don't look at magic as I'm trying to fool people. It's more about giving people that feeling of mystery, that feeling of the unknown. I think magic specifically has this weird paradox with practice, because at the end of the day, if you look like you've practiced too much, you look like you're too good with your hands, then that becomes the explanation. That is how you did it, right? We know how you did it, you just practiced a lot. So as a magician, you want to avoid that. You want people not to think that you are very skilled with your hands. You want them to think, at least in the back of their head, just for a second, that there might be some magic, some illusion to the whole thing. And that's kind of where it goes from just being a skill and turns into kind of a higher art form. I think, after a certain period of time, you lose the trepidation of messing up the skill part of it. And at that point, then you can make it feel like it's magic. Then you can erase the practice. But erasing that practice also takes practice. As a magician, you practice how to make things look natural. So you stand in the mirror and you think to yourself, does my hand look natural? Kind of weird thoughts that I don't think you think most other art forms. You know, when you're playing the piano, you don't think it's like, I don't want to make it look like I'm trying too hard, right? But you do that with magic. And it's not just with the hands, it's with the speech patterns too. You know, how you talk to people, how you approach people. I don't think I've ever thought to myself, this is how many hours I've practiced, right? At this point, everything that I do is practice. If I'm on a plane and thinking about a trick, that's practice. That's practicing being creative. If I'm on a phone call and I'm playing with some cards, that's practice. When I'm on stage, even though I'm actually performing, that's also practice in my mind. So I don't think there's like a ticker going like this, constantly counting the hours. I know that I think I always need to do more practice. Like I want to do more. I don't think I'll ever be at a point where I'm like completely 100% satisfied.
I'm world famous for my opinion of Dr. Dre's The Chronic, which is universally, regarded as a masterpiece. I hated The Chronic when it first came out. When it came out, my friends were having listening sessions like, yo, you hear how loud these drums sound? I was like, yeah, it's horrible. Like, this sounds like Michael Jackson. Like, I wanted it to sound like it came out of a basement. But just as an album, I'll say that it took me 18 years to realize.
18 years? I thought you were going to say 18 months.
No, it took me 18 years to really just, I regret not embracing it at the time.
I've thought of this a lot. Unusual and mediocre, in that first moment when you're just experiencing something, they register the same in your stomach. And so it takes you a while to tease apart, the reason I had that kind of what's going on here is just that I hadn't encountered that before. Food is a better example of this.
Okay.
Absolutely every single person on the planet has an example of a food that they could not stand when they first ate it, and that later became their favorite dish. You give sushi to a 6-year-old, they make a face.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
But 100% that one day they're gonna love sushi.
Right.
Right? They're not registering that sushi is terrible. They're registering that sushi is unusual. And they're not old enough or mature enough to know the difference, to know that that just feels the same in that. Well, but adults, we never really grow out of this. I've been obsessed recently with this idea of the importance of being uncomfortable. Like, we've been having this whole argument in this country about diversity. And what is diversity really about? The reason white guys ran the world for as long as they did was they didn't want to share their power with people who weren't like them. Partly because they didn't believe that people who weren't white guys were at their level, but partly because when you introduce people who aren't like you into the workplace, your workplace becomes uncomfortable for a while. Mm-hmm. People who aren't like you ask different questions and think differently and bring up stuff that you would never have thought of.
Right.
And it was their unwillingness to be uncomfortable that was part of the reason they put up barriers. And the only way you ever make a workplace diverse is if people are willing to say, it's actually kind of fun to be uncomfortable. It's exciting, right? It's about telling a different kind of story.
So why do our brains avoid discomfort and confuse new and bad? Are all our brains hardwired to make that mistake? Dr. Shweta Chakraborty is a risk and behavior scientist, and she has some answers.
When our ancestors would see something new, it could potentially be really dangerous, like a poisonous snake or a tiger, and our ancestors would make the snap decision to run away, and that worked out well for them. But it doesn't always work out for us in the modern day society. We're all universally hardwired to find things that are new and unfamiliar and unnatural to also be conflated as bad. But another thing that we all have in common universally is the ability to overcome that innate wiring. What's incredible about our brains is that we have the ability to learn new things for the entirety of our lives. So when confronted with something new, pay attention to that discomfort that arises. Why am I also feeling that this is dangerous or this might not be good for me? And if you can get into the habit of doing that, if you can really practice recognizing where your perceptions are coming from, now we can override that innate wiring and we can actually align our perceptions to reality, because that reality might actually be, wow, what an amazing new opportunity to pursue. What's unique about people that have really ventured into the unknown, from science to medical breakthroughs, to creativity and art, to politics, is the ability to withstand that discomfort, to actually reframe that risk as something that was going to be potentially beneficial, not for just themselves, but for society at large. That is the opportunity that comes with practicing how to overcome your cognitive dissonance, your discomfort.
The 10,000 hour rule is also known as the 10-year rule, because 10,000 hours is roughly, if you do something a lot, you'll hit your 10,000 hours in 10 years. So I was at the Washington Post for exactly 10 years. And when I started the Washington Post, I was a really, really, really slow, painfully neurotic writer. By the end, I remember there was a shooting on the LIRR. Mm-hmm. It happened at like 4:30 in the afternoon. The paper closed. You had to get your story in by like 6:30. It wouldn't make the paper.
Right.
I interview a bunch of people from 5:15 to 5:55. And then I go to a payphone, back when they had payphones.
Right.
And it was so automatic at that point that I just picked up the phone and I talked the story into the phone. And someone on the other end in Washington, like, transcribed it. And they didn't change a word. It was just like, with quotes, with facts, it just came out of me because I had been writing in that way and working in that form for so long. I quit the Washington Post like a couple months later because I realized if I kept doing this thing that I had achieved that level of mastery with, I would grow stale as a writer. I wouldn't be able to do the other kinds of writing I wanted to do.
For me, the 0 years of my life are always the paradigm shifts. Like at 10, my dad is sort of coaxing me into the family business. By 20, that's when I decided to pursue the roots full time. By 30, I wanted to work with other people. And then 40, we got an offer to do late night television. Now at 50, I'm entering a world of directing.
So that's a beautiful example of this. So you have an innate restlessness and curiosity that kicks in once you achieve mastery in a given field. Privileging your curiosity is an incredibly important part of what it means to be creative.
What's the one thing that you have yet to master that you're anxious to sort of check off on your bucket list?
Probably writing fiction. The fact that a story is real, it actually happened, means so much to me that the idea of operating in a universe where I get to come up with those stories. Like, I'll give you an example. I was writing today I'm doing this big thing on Tom Bradley, first Black mayor of Los Angeles, who's an incredibly interesting character. And he has this problem, which is that Los Angeles is a city that's majority white. Mm-hmm. He's a black guy. 17% of Los Angeles is African American.
Right.
The only way he can serve the African American community is by being mayor. The only way he can stay mayor is by not serving the African American community. If they think he's just the mayor of black people, they'll vote him out, right? He's in this bind.
Right.
Rodney King happens, and there's a meeting held at the First African Methodist Church in South Central, the serious black church of LA.
Right.
And everyone's there. Everyone who is anyone in the African American community of Los Angeles is there. There are riots going on 2 blocks away. Everyone he stands up to speech. It's his church, by the way. He's a congregant at famed church.
Right.
And he gives a speech saying, this is a time for calm. And they boo him off the stage.
Yep.
The fact that actually happened was so powerful, because I just imagine, here's a guy who has given his life to serving the city of Los Angeles. He's at the end of his career. Rodney King happens. He's standing up in front of his own church and gets booed off the stage. So he must have stepped down from the pulpit and walked down the middle of the aisle and heard those boos ringing in his ears. And I was overwhelmed by like what he must have gone through in that moment, because it was real, right? But the fiction writer could create that and have an emotional response even knowing it never happened. That's what I can't do. And I want to do that.
Practice versus curiosity. What's more important? Like most deep truths, the answer is not either or, but both and. Practice is key, but it only gets you so far. To level up, you need the hunger and openness of a beginner's mind. The Balvenie is the case in point. As a family distillery that started in 1892, they've got nearly 130 years of practice under their collective belt. But instead of just making the same thing again and again, they regularly break routine to pioneer new craft processes that shake things up and open up new frontiers for future generations of whiskey makers. Yes, if you want to get good at something, practice. But if you want to get great, if you want to add your voice to the world, step out of your groove and try something new.